Hello, I'm Carol Talbot, the creator and founder of the Possibility Hub. Now, to learn from and spend time with an awakened, enlightened teacher is certainly a rare gem in these modern times. So my guest in this latest episode is Peggy Dylan, often referred to as the mother of the Western firewalking movement. Her teachings reach deeply into the truths of mystical traditions, tapping into the roots of our ancestral wisdom to teach through parables and stories that both instruct, nurture, delight, and heal. And that's what you're going to discover in this very powerful conversation. Hello and welcome, Peggy, to the Possibility Hub. I am so excited about our conversation today. The reason I'm excited is just before this call, I looked back over my certificates and saw that it was 2005 that I traveled to Le Cornu in, I think it's the Swiss-French or Swiss-German border to attend my first firewalking training with you. And I say first because there were many more after that. And it certainly turned out to be much more than I expected, because many people, when they think of the firewalk, they think of it as a very sort of high energy, motivating experience. And of course it can be. Yet during the training, it was much more than firewalking training. It was a very deeply spiritual experience as well, and a very transformational experience. So I wanted to kick off this conversation and talk about, the connection and how you built that connection between a motivating experience like the firewalk and then bringing the spiritual element into it.
Well, Carol, first let me start by saying it's delightful to be with you. As you said, that we've both fallen in love with firewalking and have been involved for so long, and it's just delightful for me to be giving my energy to your program here and your students. I came from a spiritual background when the firewalk entered my life. And so the spiritual inclinations, if that's what you want to call them, were already there and present. And in some ways, the firewalk intensified that. Firewalking has, up until our time, always been a spiritual experience. So let me clarify what I mean by spiritual. People have different ideas about it. The way when I say spiritual, what I mean is a capacity within the human being to transcend our current beliefs about reality and perceive a greater reality. And then bring that perception back into our present time so that we can allow that greater reality to influence how we move through life. Does it make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
When you talk about that greater reality, I so remember a story that you told us when you were building up to the firewalk and you drew it out with Can you remember that story? And it talked about, that greater reality, and almost as if, you're in a house and then you break down the walls kind of thing.
I think that is a quote. I can't remember the author of the quote, but I believe it was a Middle Eastern mystic who said something about that spirituality is what is like a house. A house without a door or windows is unusable. But when you have doors and windows in your house, in other words, you can see a greater reality beyond your house. That's what makes your house usable. And so I believe that's what you're talking about, that we have to put doors and windows into our house, into our psyche, into our ego. There needs to be an opening to the greater reality, which makes this house of our body and our mind usable, fully functional. We all know people who or we see people, if we don't know them, who don't have that spiritual connection, and they're not very happy or alive or functional human beings. It's the people with the spiritual connection, and it doesn't matter in what religious base or spiritual base that is, because the source is all the same. It's just our human perception that changes how we perceive it. So, but it's those open doors and windows that make us fully functional and alive humans. So I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, is that quote.
Yes, and look, you're a master at storytelling as well. So it's as you speak, I'm getting lots of little connections of bing, bing, bing. Oh, was it this story, that story, and other things that you told us, from all those years ago. Yes. Now you were brought up with, I believe your mother was a mystic, and your father was a physicist, a nuclear.
Yes, he knew nuclear physicist. Yes. Yeah.
So that's quite a blend. And did you choose? Was there a time where you had to choose? Do I go the science route, or do I go the mystical route? Or were your parents obviously blended and respecting both avenues?
No, there was a time that I chose. Let me just tell you this story, since we have time for it, and because we're in the middle of a war period again. This was right at the end of the Bosnian War in the 90s, that I was invited to participate in a remarkable event that was happening. I had led a couple of corporate firewalks for a company called Whalen, and he sold his company, and through the grapevine I was told he had made 300 million. What he told me, that's dollars, what he told me was that he had more money than he and his family could ever use after the sale of his company. And so he was in the enviable position, again, his words, to be able to do something that was really good. And so what he decided he was going to do was make sure that war never got fought again. Because as we all know, that war was a generational war. That the kids who were injured in the war grew up to be adults and the war would happen again. So he decided he wasn't going to do that anymore. That he was going to stop that war from happening again. So he sent social scientists to Bosnia-Herzegovina to find out what needs to happen. And what they came back with was, you need to heal the youth. And so he brought 50 youth leaders over to the States. And then every year would bring over 50 more. And in those 6 weeks, he brought in master teachers from teaching business skills, teaching thinking skills, teaching like through meditation and qigong and some other martial arts, teaching ways of deflecting the energy instead of feeling attacked, giving yourself space. I mean, remarkable things. And he brought me in to teach the firewalk. For the sense of connection and motivation. And then after the firewalk, they were sent out a week-long vision quest by canoe, because this was in the Great Lakes on an island. So they were sent out on a canoe, and in that week, they had to decide what they were going to do with their life. The only parameter was that it had to serve their country. It couldn't be just be for personal fame or personal money. It had to be in service of. And then for a year, he would support them. He would bring in, he'd give them the money to create their vision, and he would bring in any support and fly the support over there to support them, because he had the money to play. And after a year, they had to be self-sufficient, and he'd bring the next 50 over. So it was an extremely successful program. And that first year, he had both boys and girls. He had from 13 to 33, so some of them were young men and young women. And he had people who had been part of all three of the social religious backgrounds. And he had people who had been soldiers and people who had been victims. So it was the most explosive group of humans I have ever worked with. You just never knew what was going to happen. They stopped having open conversations because the kids would get so aggressive. And all of their stuff would come up. And so they had a ball instead of a talking stick. And so anyone who had the ball was allowed to talk. And if you didn't have the ball, you were not allowed to talk. So there are two young men who were very opposed in looks, became the speakers of the opposing forces. One of them looked like a punk, shaved head, big earrings, T-shirt with the arms torn out, red pants, and big combat boots, and the other looked like a Harvard graduate. So, but they were the spokespeople for the various groups. A war started in this group between these two young men were the leaders of these opposing groups. And then I watched the guy with the red pants, the punky looking guy. He was unbelievable in his capacity to read people. And every leader, I came in 4 days early so I could watch other leaders work with the group. And he reduced these leaders to puddles, one after the other. They would get up, they would start their teaching, he'd raise his hand, and he would attack. And he would reduce them into incapable of moving forward with the group. And so I watched him as he did this. And what he would do is he would scan them and get where their Achilles heel was, and then he would attack that. And he was just so good at it. And so I watched this for 4 days, and then it was my turn. And I had decided the only way to get past this and keep the group responding to me was to not engage with him. And so I started talking about energizing your future goals and taking action so that your future goals get energized. When this young man, and he had certain tells, he would cross his arms and then his big feet with his combat boots would start moving, and then he'd lean forward and then he'd attack. And so I watched the tells happening. I watched his arms cross. I watched his boots starting to move. He leaned forward and I was ready for him. And he goes, only a fool would go for their goals in life. And that was my Achilles heel, because in that statement was all of his pain. He watched his parents, he watched his friends go for their goal of liberation, and they died. Only a fool would go for their goals in life.
Wow.
But, I had would have my Achilles heel if I didn't have my way to move forward. And so I said to him, well, that's one perspective to have. And I just kept going with my talk. But he had become the spokesperson for the group. And so I kept going in my talk, but the group stayed with him. And I'm sure as a public speaker, you've had that experience where you just lose your group. And yes, they were with him. They weren't following anything I was saying. And he got really agitated. I was the first speaker who had not engaged with him. He got really agitated, and he was side talking and looking at me and side talking, looking at me. And finally he sat up straight and he says, I want a real answer. And I was standing in front of this group of these kids that had been damaged more than I will ever be damaged in my life. And what could I give them? What could I possibly give them? And I just stood there for a minute and I said, what can I give them except my truth? What can I give them except my truth? And so I talked about riding my horse as a teenager when I was about their age. I was 17. And we had just moved from Switzerland, where I grew up, to the States. And I was riding my horse along the coastal range, looking down into the Bay Area. And there was this brown cloud, and I'd never seen anything like it. So I went home and I asked my mom, what is that brown cloud? So I'm telling this to the kids. And she says, it's smog. And I said, it's smog? And at that moment, this is the moment I was telling you about, or your question brought up in me. It was at that moment I realized I had a choice. I had a choice to become a scientist and figure out ways to eliminate pollution, or I could do the spiritual work. And if I did the spiritual work and connected people to that place we were talking about, that's the open doors and windows, that place beyond humans, the human psyche, which helps guide us, then I would create, exactly, then I would create humans who could listen and would hear the greater voice saying, don't pollute. And that was for me a more powerful way to go. And so that was the moment I made the choice to become who I became. And so I looked at these kids and I said, I don't know if I am going to die before I reach my goals. But what I do know, and I know without a doubt, is that because I chose a way that is close to my soul, I have had an amazing life. And that is what I want for you. And he just sat there, and then he stood up and started to clap. And all 50 kids stood up and started to clap. Now, I thought that moment was beyond anything I would have expected. But that night, when the fire was raked out and ready to be walked, this kid with the big pants walked up to the Harvard-looking kids and just offered his hand. And those boys took hands and they walked across the fire hand in hand together first. And it was at that moment that Bosnia-Herzegovina started to heal. It was at that moment when the personal animosity was buried in order to allow hope to be reborn and vision to be reborn.
What an incredible experience. And I love the fact that you said, when you speak your truth. And that is a challenge for many people, to find their truth. And when they do, the wisdom that comes through in the moment at times like that. And I think of some of my own experiences where I sometimes have some clients and they're opening the doors, they're opening their heart. And there's times, and it's been a great privilege actually, and I've learned many things this way, of where it's in those quiet moments, and I sometimes think I have no idea how I can support you or what I need to say. And in that moment of stillness, when you truly are in your truth and being of service, it just comes, something comes, and out it comes, and it's always the right thing at the right moment that supports their growth, their healing, or what needs to open up for them. And I've consistently found that's a privilege. And it's also allowed me to trust my truth and the greater reality and the greater perspective that we have when we go this path. So what a beautiful sharing. Thank you so much, Peggy. That's really...
Yeah, and I just wanted to remark on that, because it's that trust that really allows the healing to happen. You know, it's the same thing with the fire walk, right? You don't know what aspect of the human psyche body makes fire walking possible. None of us do. People have theories, blah, blah, blah.
Yes,
but the
exactly.
truth is, none of us know. And so no matter how many times we've walked, that stepping onto the coals for the first time in a new walk is exactly that moment, you know, that trust. And that's, we have to be willing for true healing, for true movement. We have to be willing, you know, to just be with those open doors and windows and just allow that to happen. And so it's a beautiful the way you framed that, because it's so true.
And isn't, you're so right also about the firewalk, you know, even to this day, you know, I don't get to walk the coals so often because, as you know, we're holding the space for people to have that experience. And I love it when people come and they see that waiver, as I did when I first went to the training with you. And I thought, I'm not signing this. And of course I did. And the magic that happens when so many people say, I'm just going to watch. And I say, that's absolutely fine, sign the waiver. And to see them change their minds and to feel the energy lift when they walk across those coals, particularly those ones who thought, I am just going to watch, and then they see the joy and the energy and the experience. And not to say that it doesn't bring up things for me today, because even if I do get the opportunity to walk, it still brings the oil up to the surface.
Of course,
oh gosh, there's a few more fears left there. There's a few more. So that never changes. But the transformation, and you are right, you know, it's been around for thousands and thousands of years, practiced in many cultures around the globe, not just as a motivating experience, really as a true transformation experience. And I always think it's allowing us to be more than we thought we could be. You know, we're contained in this box, opening the doors again, opening the windows, you know, opening the door to possibilities of, you know, if I can do that, what else can I do in my life? And I'm more than just the human being in this physical form. I'm an expanded being that has the ability to bring in so much more. Now, you've studied with many, many masters, and also what impressed me on the programs was that there were so many other elements that came in, and so many beautiful people also that came into the experiences as well, from breath work, sound, movement. I remember Susanna and Yakov with trance dance. I remember discovering my voice. There was fasting, there was a sweat lodge. So we've got the shamanic perspective, we've got different modalities coming in here. Who were some of the masters that you studied with that really impacted your life and set you on this path?
Well, the primary one was Swami Kesavadas, a Hindu teacher, mystic, a musical mystic. And I love music, but I'm musical. I had ear infections as a child, and my voice and ear do not harmonize very well.
Sounds like me. I love singing, but not everybody else enjoys it.
And so Swami Keshavas, I had an enlightened experience as a child when I went into a psychic spiritual crisis after my sister's death. She died when I was 11, and at 12 I had a spontaneous enlightenment experience due to the inner agony pushing me towards really opening those windows and doors that we're speaking about symbolically here. But it was a very difficult time from 12 to 16 until I met him, because there was nobody in my environment that could verify my experience or even comprehend what I was going through. My mother started, in order to deal with her grief, we were living in Switzerland, as I said, and she started at the Jung Institute with her own studies and her own healing. That's Carl Jung's institute with dream analysis. And so she was very helpful, but she still she couldn't comprehend what I was going through, the depth of what I was going through. And so when I met Swami Kesavadas, when he walked through the door, when we were in a group of about 60 people, it was such a relief to feel a person who lived in the reality that I had touched on when I was 12. He walked in that, and I didn't even know it was possible, because there's so few people around who have those mystical capacities in our lifetime. And so it was just a tremendous relief. And he took me under his wing and started working with me. And that is so he would be the number one person for my transformation, as far as giving me skills. It would probably be Leonard Orr, who I was in his first breathwork training back in the mid 70s, when he was still discovering it. And that was his experiment with training other people, trying to teach other people how to teach this, how to facilitate breath work. And so it was a fabulous time of exploration.
That would have been the Knights of Esalen, wouldn't it? And I know that Leonard Orr was very interested in immortality and studied many of the masters and what created that.
Yeah, he was a fascinating human being. And the people he attracted, it was them as much as him. He was a very complicated human, and so I never got very close to him because his complicated nature. I'm just going to give you one example. He believed that the more affected you were in his presence, so the more uncomfortable you were in his presence, the more that indicated how enlightened he was. And yeah, exactly. And so in order to please him, people would get very uncomfortable in his presence, because we do that with each other. We sort of react to each other's desires, right? I didn't want to be around him because I don't like feeling uncomfortable. So I did trainings with him, but the people around him were superb. I mean, just incredible group of people he pulled together. And the other was Richard Deertrack, one of my Native American teachers. His sweetness and his love of the earth and his love of humanity, just incredible, just incredible. And so a lot of my respect for the Native American culture and a lot of my inclusion of those rituals in my work came from the tenderness with which he walked through life. I'm just going to give you an example here. He and his wife were both friends of mine, and they are going through a really, really rough patch in their relationship. And so she called me and said, could she come and spend a weekend with me, just to have some space? So I drove down from the mountains where I live and picked her up. And I was taking a rest in a downstairs bedroom of theirs, because it's about a 3-hour drive down there before we drove back up, when he came home. And so you can imagine what most men would do internally with having the woman's friend coming to take her away.
Yes.
From a conflict. You know, there would be anger, there'd be resentment. And I was in sort of a dream state, and he walked into the bedroom not expecting me to be there, and I was lying on a couch in their bedroom, and he walked in and he saw me, and what he did is he filled my energetic field. So all my mind and my energetic field was filled with butterflies. he just sent me this energy of all these sweet butterflies around me. That's what he did. That's what he did. It was like just gratitude. And what sweet blessing can I give Peggy as an expression of gratitude that she's taking care of my beloved. So that is how he moved through life, in that way. And so when I do the rituals, whether it's the smudging, whether it's the sweat lodge, those Native American based rituals, it's due to that sweetness that I try to bring into my groups.
Yes,
so those
it's somebody who sees the greater perspective rather than how things appear to be. And again, those open doors, open windows, that greater perspective again. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward from, those times of learning different from shamanism and times with Leonard. Then you set up Sundoor.
Yeah, so Sundoor was set up by me and my ex-husband, Tali Burkan, another great story there. Do we have time for another story?
Oh gosh, as many as you want. I'm loving this.
So I had been in India. This was in 81. I had been in India with Sai Baba. I wanted my kids, my older kids, before they hit puberty, to be around a human being who had more capacity than I had, so they knew what was possible before they hit puberty and everything changes.
Modestly put.
So I had been single for 7 years, and I came back from India, and I decided it was time for a new relationship. And as I said, I'd been working with Leonard Orr, and Leonard Orr was very much into affirmations. So in affirmations, you get very clear on what your desired outcome is, and you list your desired outcome, and then you affirm the various aspects of it. So I sat down and made a list of what I was looking for in my next partner, and I wanted someone a little older than me, a little taller than me, blondish brown hair, had to have been to Sai Baba's, needed to lead personal motivational workshops, spiritual workshops. I needed to obviously have a spiritual orientation, needed to love kids, needed to play the guitar and make up love songs for me. I mean, I got specific.
Specific then.
Yeah, which is part of the, that was part of the idea back then with affirmations, is you got very specific. Within a few weeks, this guy calls me and says, hi, my name is Alexander Burkan. And my immediate internal reaction was, this guy's given me a false name over the phone. And then he goes on to say, I've just written a book. And I thought, it must be his pen name. And he says, there aren't very many people that do our kind of work up here. Would you be willing to read my book and give me feedback? And so we met a few days later at a little cafe, and I was sitting there waiting for him to show up when my inner voice said, this is the man you're going to marry. And I just went, wait a minute.
On the meeting.
What I know about this guy is he's written a book and he leads workshops, and he's given me his false name. I don't even know his real name, And I said, you can't tell me I'm going to marry him. Well, Carol, you've probably tried arguing with that little voice in your own life, and you know the absolute futility of that. And so a few minutes later, in walked a guy who was a little taller than me, had blondish brown hair, a little older than me.
Did he have a guitar on his back?
He did not, but as we talked, I learned that he played the guitar, had been to Sai Baba's, led motivational workshops, and on the weekends, because he didn't have any children of his own, he performed as a clown at birthday parties.
You were going tick, Tick.
Exactly, exactly. And starting to apologize, that inner voice, right? And so it was a few weeks later that we had gone to a movie together, and me knowing where this relationship was supposed to go, I invited him to come and teach with me in Europe. So I was leaving in 2 weeks. So and essentially I was saying, do you want to just drop your life for, well, I can't remember now if I was going over for 6
For
weeks or
me.
2 months. Yeah, well, yeah, for everything, right? And he looked at me with these sort of big eyes and opened up his glove box. So this is way back in the time of cassette tapes, which some of your audience probably won't even know what we're talking about. And he took a tape out of his, just reached in, took a tape out of his glove box. What I didn't know is that his glove box was full of recordings of his spiritual teacher's lectures. Hilda Charlton was her name. And he pulled out one and put it into the recorder, and out boomed Hilda's voice. And she was in the middle of a lecture, and she says, "You've got to listen to your hearts, dummies, not your heads." And those big eyes got even bigger, and he pushed the eject button, and he goes, "I guess I'm coming with you." And so then it was my turn to sort of panic, because I had no idea how he taught or what he taught. And so I said, "Do you have any workshops coming up so I could come and watch what you do?" And he said, yeah, the following weekend he was leading a workshop up in Northern California in Ukiah. And so we drove up there. And on the way up, we were probably 15 minutes from the facility. And he said to me, or I asked him, I said, "What do you do? What do you do in your workshops?" We've been jabbering about everything else. And he says, "Oh, I always start with a fire walk." And I look at him and I go, "A what?" Okay, fire walks, if they were even real, they were something that people in grass skirts did. You know, they were not something that we Western people did or even knew about. And I was just like, "You do a what?" And he said, "A fire walk." And then typical seminar leader, he turns to me and says, "If people are really motivated after that." And I'm thinking, I bet you they are. So we get up there and he lights a fire. He lets it burn down and people start arriving, and he pulls out that guitar of his and starts playing campfire songs. And people join in, and they're all thinking, this is a lovely way to start a workshop. And I'm thinking, this is not a lovely way to start a workshop. Because I know what's coming. They don't. He has not told them what's coming. We're just sitting around a campfire. And then he gets up, not telling them what he's doing, and he rakes out the fire. And he puts the rake down, and he stands in front of the fire, and he says, "Fire because you believe it works. Watch what I do and do what I do, and you won't get burned. Do what I do and you won't get burned." That was the extent of his firewalking lecture. And then he walked. And I pulled out of my hat something that I've used in past times and I have used since then, which is, if he can do it, I can do it. And I walked over the fire after him. And it completely shattered my concepts of physical reality, as it has done for many people who have firewalked. If this, a basic building block of reality, fire burns, is not necessarily reality. It's changeable. What else is changeable? Yeah. I am inadequate. Maybe that's changeable. I can't express myself. Maybe that's changeable. I can't in whatever form. Maybe that's all changeable. When you pull out that one piece that says fire has to burn, suddenly reality is opened in a different way. And I just said to him, keep going with the group. I'm going to need some time here. And I went and sat on a stump in the apple orchard that was there. And I just allowed that to happen, that change to happen. And it was at that moment, sitting in that apple orchard, that I realized that the fire walk was the transformative tool that I'd been looking for, not for me, but as a teaching tool, as a transformative tool for humanity. And Tali and I started a partnership, a marriage, as guidance had told us. We had a daughter together, and we started the firewalking movement, and we started Sundor together, which is why I told you the story. Sundor, the name Sundor comes from the Inuit, an Eskimo tribe. They say that the shaman goes through 7 doors and then flies through the sun door, the 7th door, into ever awakened consciousness. And I figured if I was going to choose a name for my company, or our company at that time, I would want to choose a name that really had my true objective. I have no desire for people to earn more money, or even self-esteem issues. That all of that stuff dissolves when we have that openness, that those doors and windows are open, and we feel the love of the universal flowing to us and through us. Then everything else dissolves. And so the objective of Sundor is to create that openness, to allow participants to feel that love of the divine that flows into our bodies through that openness, and that just sets everything that is out of alignment back into alignment and back into beauty and joy. So that's where Sundor started and came from, and its objective.
And of course, it's an objective and a theme that still holds true to this day, because there's always more as we expand consciousness. And I love the fact, when you were telling that story, that you didn't go in, you wanted to stay out and think about, gosh, what really is this about? And you're quite right. For me, I was also looking for tools that really shift people quickly, that create those new neurological connections, because those peak experiences that we get so stuck in our story, that really propel people forward, that rip the plaster off. Or, as I like to say, if you think of the snake as a power animal, it sheds its skin, it moves on, it doesn't look back and go, oh, let me take this with me because I may need to put it on again, which is sadly what happens with so many experiences, that people go back again and again and again because they're dragging the old skin with them, rather than being the snake that sort of moves on and it's like, okay, I can create a new story now, there's more. And I also remember, gosh, this conversation brings back so many wonderful memories for me. At Lendrick Lodge in Scotland, going out one by one and spending time with the fire by yourself while other things were going on inside, not feeling that you were missing out, but really connecting with the fire and what it really means. And of course, I always remember that Stephen organized the bagpipes, Amazing Grace, on one of the wonderful nights, such an evocative sound coming through from the distance as we were, in that glade ready to walk the coals. Such a powerful experience. So look, you are known as the mother of the Western firewalking movement. And that's been the case for many, many, many years. And Sundor still continues to provide transformational experiences above and beyond just the firewalk, for sure. So what possibilities do you feel that you've really opened up for people, thousands and thousands of people over the years, including myself? So what warms your heart about the possibilities that have opened up for people with the work that you were called to do?
Well, there's sort of 2 prongs that really nourish me when I look back and look forward. And one of them is that people are happier in their lives and happier in their minds and happier in their bodies and hearts when they leave Sundor. That there's just a sense of well-being and a sense of inner grace and a knowledge of their basic innocence, maybe, basic, just the goodness of life. And then the secondary one is the one that you exemplify and many other people exemplify, which is there are absolutely excellent teachers who keep that spark of Sundor going, whether they call it Sundor, whether they call it firewalking, whether they call it whatever their company name is, but that I have been able to blow on the spark in their own souls and get it strong enough so that they can share it with humanity. You know, one body can only reach so many, but there are many bodies and hearts out there now who are serving humanity in the way you do, Carol. And that is so deeply gratifying for me.
Oh, beautiful. So what possibilities for you now, as I see all the art behind you and painting and things like that? What are new possibilities that continue to inspire and open up for you?
Well, the painting is actually very new. A number of years ago, my husband and I bought a piece of land up in the Sierra at 8,400 feet. That's almost 3,000 meters. So very, very high up there, and we're putting a cabin up there. And he was a wilderness ranger. And so one of our loves together is hiking in the mountains. And I developed foot problems. And right after we bought the land and started building the cabin, and I was like, I can't hike. And so my thought was, what else can I do to love the mountains if I can't hike? And I can paint them. I can paint the mountains. And so I started painting mountains. The Peruvians call sacred mountains Apu. A sacred mountain is called an Apu. And so I called it my Apu series. I have bridged out into other things now, but so the painting's quite new. So what is for me right now, Carol, what I am doing is I am taking time to be. You know, the world is in a very different place than it was 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. You know, we're dealing with a lot. And part of that dealing with a lot is tremendous human tension. I mean, what brings up human tension more than anything else is survival fears.
Yes.
And we as a planet are there. You know, our animal psyche is giving us every signal that something is off in our environment and we cannot depend on future survival. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can't get other humans to stop taking oil out of the earth, you know, and so we're up against this. I am taking time within this time of upheaval, emotional human upheaval, to find connection and joy and peace and a direction. And so I can't tell you what's next, but what I can tell you is that whatever is next will be based on a deep sense of connection with those doors and windows wide, wide open, so I can do the most amount of good. So that is where I'm at right now in my journey.
Well, that's a beautiful place to be. And it's a beautiful place to finish this rich and very nourishing conversation. And I want to thank you for sharing some really, really powerful experiences that you've been through. I know we could speak for hours and hours and hours. I'd certainly like to speak for more hours. But really, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your grace, your insight. It's been my pleasure to have, and an honor to have had the opportunity to speak with you again today, but also an honor to study with you and spend time with you in the most amazing learning environments. They've really been very rich and made a big impact, deep impact in my life. So I thank you for that. And I'll be sharing the website details. Are you still doing any journeys, taking people on any journeys, or is it open to a
Yes. We actually had one planned for Peru this fall, but COVID has hit Peru very heavily.
Yes.
And so what we've done is we've changed it to a journey here in the States, in California, up into the mountains with Native American teachers, and myself and Stephen, of course. So that's Stephen Mulhern from Lendrick Lodge. So we will be doing that this fall, and then we'll just see what comes next. We have to wait and to see how COVID plays out. But the objective is to keep the journeys going. We'll see.
Yes,
We'll see.
and I think
We'll see.
that's the state of everyone right now. It's rather than be present, rather than plan too far ahead.
Yeah.
It's just be all right with how things are now. So thank you once again for such a rich conversation. Really been a pleasure speaking with you, Peggy. Thank you.
It's been wonderful, Carol. Really, really wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me in. What comes out of me is often a reflection of the person I'm talking to. So thanks for pulling out those lovely stories that I got to remember.
Thank you.